Hey everyone, my name's Ryan from Excel Logics, and welcome to the video on Excel tables, slicers, and pivot tables. In this video, we'll mostly explore slicers. Slicers are really useful for drilling down into your data and sorting it by specific values such as gender, category, profession, or region in this case. First, let's talk about what slicers are. Slicers are visual filters. Using a slicer, you can filter your data, whether it's in a table, a pivot table, or a pivot chart, by clicking on one type of data that you want. Here I've added 1, 2, 3, 4 slicers, and I've overlaid them so they look nice. Let's just see quickly how it works. If I want to only view females in my table, I just click female, and it will basically slice the table, or in other words, sort the table, so you only see females. This is sorted based on column E. In this video, we'll mostly be working with this data set. First, let's just clear the filters and discuss the data set. This data set contains dates of sale, the time the sale was made, the customer name, the customer gender, the customer region, which is spelled wrong, the customer profession, the product category. Here we have music, podcasts, TV shows, movies, and radio. And we have the product size, or in other words, what was that's kind of like a subcategory, whether they purchased subscriptions, annual unlimited package, or they made a one-time purchase. And then we have their prepaid months. In this case, the prepaid months for one-time purchases would correspond to the number of items purchased. And then the price. So with this data set, we'll insert slicers, and we'll learn how the slicers can make our data easier to use. Basically, the slicers allow you to drill down into your data, as I mentioned. So let's explore the second slicer, which is a slicer for product category. For product category, I can drill down and just look at movies. Or I can just look at music, podcasts, radio, and TV shows. And it sorts the entire table. Basically, it hides the rows that don't contain the field that you specify. Now you can use multiple slicers. Let's say I want to look at TV shows purchased by males. Now I've sorted based on 2 slicers. We have only males and only TV shows. Let's add a third slicer and just look at self-employed males who purchase TV shows. We can do statistics based on the pivot table and also make graphs that use data from the pivot table after you select the slicer. So essentially the graphs will change based on the slicer selections. We'll talk about that later in the video. Let's finally add the third one and only look at males who purchase TV shows who are self-employed in Europe. Now we can just see a handful of males who satisfy all those conditions. We can see that there's pretty well an even distribution between one-time purchases and subscriptions, but none of them, I don't think any of them made annual unlimited purchases. So that's a brief overview of how you can use slicers to drill down into your data. We'll talk about them more in this video. Let's talk about how to add slicers. First, let me clear the current filters. You can hit this button on the slicer to clear the selections. And let's go ahead and delete all of our current slicers, so we'll re-add them. And we might as well just start from a blank slate. So we'll just copy all this, Control-Shift down, copy the data. Let's just start a new sheet called Data 2 and paste our data here. Let's quickly format it so we can work with it nicely. Align everything to the left, and we need to change the formatting of the date column so it's a short date. And we'll also change, oh, what happened to the date? Looks like it got weird. 2015, yeah, it was all from 2015. And then the time also got messed up as well. So let's correct the time. Perfect. And I usually just apply a little bit of formatting, make sure that everything's correct before putting it into a table. You have to make your data into a table or a pivot table or pivot chart if you wish to use the slicers. And let's highlight this range and my mouse stops being weird. Perfect. Bold it, and to insert the table is the next step. You can either highlight the whole table or just click on anything here. As long as the columns are all next to each other and there's no blanks in the rows, it will automatically insert the table and take up the entire range. In this case, we go down all the way to row 3742. So let's select this or just one cell in the table, go to Insert and select Table. Our data has headers, so Excel will automatically rename the columns based on the names in the top row. Click OK. Apply some formatting if you wish. Now we have our table. It's almost time to insert our first slicer. A little bit smaller. Okay, so let's, before we do that, let's just add a total column at the bottom. So let's go here, total row as we discussed, and make sure we have a total here. We also want to know total units sold. Perfect, and we could add a count here. Great. Scroll up to the top, and let's add a slicer. The first thing to note is that you can only add slicers after Excel 2010. In Excel 2010, you can only add a slicer to pivot tables. To insert a slicer in Excel 2010, you'll simply go to the Insert ribbon and click on Insert Slicer. If you're using Excel 2013 or 2016, you can add a slicer to either pivot tables or to regular tables. If you're adding a slicer to regular tables, they essentially just act like auto-filters and filter your table data. To add a slicer to a regular table, you'll just go to the Insert ribbon. And it usually appears here. Oh, you have to go to the Design tab, sorry. And then you'll just click Insert Slicer. When you're adding to pivot tables, it's a little bit different. And we can look at that later in the video, and also in the pivot tables video. So what we'll do is we'll hit the Insert Slicer button and select what we want to insert slicers for. You can select as many as you wish. Let's just try selecting them all. Click OK. We now have a bunch of slicers. I like to arrange them in a nice way. So I'll essentially stack them one on top of another. It might be nice to zoom out here and then arrange them like this. Perfect. So you can imagine that we could use, well, not imagine, but we'll do it. You can essentially use the drop downs on each column to filter your data. So you could filter it alphabetically by customer name, or you could filter it by gender, whatever works best for your purposes. Basically, what the slicers do is they act as an easier to view menu to filter the data, same as using the drop downs. So let's just use some of our slicers. Say we only want to see purchases made by someone named Ahmed. Just select that and it will automatically filter. And then maybe we want to filter that by category. So we'll select only music. And maybe you only want to see people in Europe. That's currently ticked off, so we're only looking at European. Let's see if we want to look at all regions. We'll just clear the filter from here. So it looks like he's only made purchases in Europe. And if you want to add some other names, you can just hold Control and select off some other names as well. So now we have Ahmed, Barry, Dorothy, and Ganesh. We can see that these customers come from everywhere except the United States. So slicers are really useful for people who maybe aren't as familiar with Excel because it's something that they're used to looking at, which is just a nice little menu where they can click off what they want to, basically what they want to look at. Let's just clear all of our filters. And make sure we're back to square one. Perfect. So in the next part of the video, we'll discuss how to use single versus multi-selection in the filters. And we can also add multiple filters to the same thing. But to quickly just select multiple things, like I mentioned, you just hold the Control button down. And that will allow you to select multiple things. Notice that the other pivot tables, the other slicers will change as your selections go. So if I clear all the current filters, and I just select sales that are for maybe, let's go like with $2. Then all the other things change. You can see that there was no annual unlimited products purchased for $2, and the only $2 items sold are podcasts and TV shows. People who spent $2 came from all the regions that we operate in. And $2 sales were made on all the days except for the last 3 days in the data set. So that's essentially how we can use the slicers and how to insert them as well. So just to recap on that, to add a slicer, you'll just go to the Design tab in the ribbon and just click Insert Slicer. Let's talk about how to add an interactive chart that changes based on the selections in a slicer. First, we need to set up a pivot table that gives the data that you want for your chart. So to insert a pivot table, we'll simply click anywhere on the chart, go to the Design tab, and you can click Summarize with Pivot Table. Pivot tables make it really easy to select specific stuff in the table and only display that data. So let's just go to Summarize with Pivot Table. Brings up the Create Pivot Table window. It automatically highlights the data in your table and excludes the header row, which is perfect. We want to use Table 14, which is just the name of this table. Let's put it into a new worksheet and click OK. We now have a new worksheet with the pivot table. And the pivot table is blank until you start to add stuff. Let's add to our pivot table customer gender, customer region, and price. Now we can see that we have females and males from all these areas, and the sum of the total sales that were made. We'll just format it as currency and align it to the left. If you want to change anything else, just click anywhere on the pivot table. Next, let's add filters. So we may want to filter by gender. See how now gender is up here? We can add a slicer for this pivot table by clicking on Insert, the pivot table, I think is here, and then Insert Slicer. So you go to Pivot Table, Tools, and then Analyze. So just insert a slicer, and that will just be for the gender, and click OK. Now, if you select female, it automatically changes this filter to female or male, and the prices change as well. If we want to add that to a chart, we'd probably just use a bar chart. So we'll go to Insert, and let's go Chart, and just select a simple bar chart. Just for fun, we can make it 3D. Perfect. Now, since I had that pivot table selected, it's automatically it's automatically done this for us. So let me just undo that. Now, if I change the selection, female, male, it's changing the chart automatically for me. So it's really useful if you work somewhere where you analyze data to use slicers and just make it easier for people to change the graphs automatically. We'll quickly just change the title to total sales by gender and region. Now, if we want to just hide those selections over there, I think there's a way to do it. Maybe not. Okay. Just drag that down. Perfect. And let's just quickly change the formatting, make it look even cooler. Maybe something like this would be nice. So we have total sales by gender and region, and we can change it based on their gender. Now, if you want to really impress people as well, simply just hide these rows. Shift this down a little bit, and just drag it a little bit bigger. Move this over. Oh, and by the way, you can also change the formatting of this. If you just, I think you go to Slicer Tool Options, and you can change it to kind of match. That kind of matches a little bit better. So there we have our customer gender selection, and we'll just give this a white background. Perfect. Now, this chart is linked to the data. We can also add other ones as well. So I can click, let's just unhide what we have here. I have to select all, right click, and unhide if you right click on the row. Perfect. Let's select this pivot table and add some more data. We'll keep the customer gender and region, and also add customer profession, as well as product category. Drag this a little bit bigger, and you can see what we've done. So in this chart, we have each country, retired self-employed, professional, and we have the same thing for China. China had professionals, retired, self-employed, and unemployed. Canada just had retired and self-employed. Europe, India, United States. And then within each of those categories, we've added all of the different things that we sell: movies, music, podcasts, radio, and TV shows. And then you can see the total sales. Let's add a slicer to this, and let's just hide these two rows. Perfect. And we'll just insert another slicer. So we'll just click on our pivot table again, and just unhide these quickly. Click on your pivot table, let's add another slicer. So we'll go to the Analyze, Insert Slicer, and let's just insert a slicer based on region. Let's also insert a slicer for profession and product category. Here they are, and we'll format them the same way as the other ones. If you want an easy way to quickly align all your stuff, you can use the Align button up here. If this appears behind the other slicer, you can bring it forward by right-clicking and selecting Bring to Front. And last one, we'll have to bring this to the front as well. And then we'll drag this down. Hide these two rows. and format them in all the same, so they all look the same. Perfect. So here we have our chart with total sales by gender, region, category, profession, perfect. So let's test out our slicers. Say we only want to see females. It changes the whole chart. So now you're only looking at data for females. If you want to look at data for everyone, just clear the filter. Now the chart shows data for everyone. You can see that when we have everyone selected, it's getting a little bit too cramped. Let's just move everything over. And that should look a bit better. This is still a little bit big. Can make it all a bit smaller. Perfect. So this chart is essentially summarizing almost all of your data set. And it's a lot easier to give someone than to just give them a straight up table. The slicers make it even easier for them to filter through the data and get insights that they wouldn't normally be able to do. I just realized we spelled category wrong. Perfect. We'll just explore it a little bit more. Say you only wanted to see movies. We can see that people in Canada, self-employed, purchased the most movies. In China, again, it looks like the highest one was professionals. Professionals purchased the most movies in China. In Europe, definitely self-employed purchased a lot more movies than unemployed. In India, retired people purchased the most movies. And in the United States, it was self-employed who purchased the most movies. You could do the same thing for music, podcasts, radio, and TV shows. Something interesting is that self-employed in Canada had almost the highest sales, I think the highest sales for each category. And in India, retired people I think had the highest sales for each category. We can clear that filter and start exploring based on customer profession. So say we only wanted to look at retired people. Just select that and it will only display data for retired persons. And say you only wanted retired people in China. There it is. So it's nice and clear for people and really easy to navigate around. And that's just one way you can make an interactive chart. We can make interactive charts a bunch of different ways. We could also make circle charts, line charts, and much more. Let's take a look at how to insert slicers into how to connect the slicers to multiple tables. Let's just highlight the data and start with a new sheet. So we'll just use control, let's scroll to the top and just go shift control right, shift control down, control C to copy. And there's even a shortcut to switch and insert pages. I'll just hit the little plus button. And we'll just call this data 4. Let's just paste our table here. If you just hit Control V, it'll automatically keep the formatting of your table. I believe it will change the table name. Since it's already formatted correctly, let's go ahead and change our table name. Under Table Tools in the Design tab of the ribbon, you can change the table name. Let's just call this our Sales Data 1. And hit Enter. Let's create a second table. It'll just be the same. Now that we have our two tables, we can link them with one slicer. And one slicer can essentially filter or auto-filter both of the tables. Or if you have pivot charts or graphs connected to pivot charts that come off of the table, it can filter both at the same time and correspondingly change the graphs. First, we have to rename this table. We'll call this sales data 2. Now let's add a slicer. Hit on either table, click, and just click the Design, Insert Slicer. Let's just start by inserting a slicer for customer region. Click OK. Once you've inserted the slicer for customer region, it's currently only connected to the table that you were selected on. This one appears to be connected to both. Oh, it's because it's hiding the rows. So why it's changing both of the tables is because it's hiding the rows in this table and it's hiding the rows in this table at the same time. So it appears to be working on both tables, but it's really not working on both tables. What we have to do is right-click on the filter, and we'll select Slicer Settings. Let me just look at it. I think you're looking for the report connections. Don't see it. So I don't see the ability here to actually link this to two tables at the same time, unless they're pivot tables. Let me just check out here in the options. Can we report connections? So it doesn't let you actually report connections to your tables in the slicer unless you make them into pivot tables. Let's just quickly make these both into pivot tables, and then we'll try it again. So let's just unhide all, so we'll essentially clear all the filters. And let's just create two pivot tables really quick. So I'll just click on here, any cell, just click on the design, and summarize with pivot table. We'll summarize to a new sheet. Let's summarize sales data 1, and click OK. We now have sheet 6. Let's just add what we want to filter by. We'll add gender, customer region, customer profession, product category, and price. Let's make the gender a column. Let's make the region a filter. And product category a column. Perfect. So now we have this, and we'll just change what we need to. Since this is all the prices, we can just change it all to be currency. Basically, this pivot table summarizes based on region, and then it summarizes based on profession for females and their purchases, and then for males and their purchases. So pivot tables are a really powerful tool to get more out of your data. If you want to change the design of your pivot table, you can go up here as well. Next, let's add the second pivot table. So we'll just make sure we have an important name for this. We'll just call it pivot sheet. Let's go back to our data set here and add the second pivot table. just hit Shift Control down, and then let's go to the Design tab and Summarize with Pivot Table. Let's add this to an existing worksheet. Just select Pivot Sheet and select the range and OK. We now have Pivot Table 3. We'll add all the same stuff. We can even make this one a little different if you want. Do like customer gender, customer region, and product size. Then we'll move the gender as a filter, move the region, move the product size to the values, and we want this and this to be columns. Perfect. And now we have, for our rows, let's use the category. Great. And 1 second. We want to make them the same, so let's move the customer gender, swap it here. Perfect. So now both of these tables can be filtered based on customer region. It's possible to connect a slicer to both of the tables, so that when you change something in the slicer, it will essentially slice up and display only the data you want in both of the pivot tables. After that, we can connect two graphs to both tables and use one slicer to alter both of the graphs. So we'll quickly apply the same formatting here, which is this one, to this pivot table chart. Let's just go to the design and down here. Perfect. And next step is to just review this data and make sure it's all correct, and we can format it a little bit nicer. And that should not be $signs, it should just simply be values. So we have here, based on the customer region, we have the sum of the product size, so essentially the number of units that were purchased for movie subscriptions, music, podcasts, or one-time purchases. And then at the bottom we have a grand total. And the rows, or the columns, are split up between females and males. If you wish to add a slicer, let's give it a try. So let's go to the Analyze tab and click Insert Slicer. Here we want to insert the slicer simply for the customer region and click OK. Now, if you change the slicer, notice how it's only changing values in the first pivot table. Say we want to link it to the second pivot table. Now we can right-click on the slicer and click Report Connections. Select a pivot table and chart to add. Say you want to add a pivot table 2. If you click OK, it's not going to do it yet. If I go here, Report Connections. And 1 sec. Give this pivot table a name. Hope it shows up. So this pivot table 3 and this one's pivot table 2. Wonder why it's not showing up in my report connections. Let me just investigate this and then get back to you. So the reason that the pivot table slicer didn't show under the report connections both of the pivot tables that we had is because they were created from different tables. You can see in the sheet that I made the first pivot table from this data set and the second pivot table from this data set. To link them, they have to be created from the same table. So I've added two new pivot tables. This one just shows the product categories and the total purchases made by females and males based on the region. And then this one's also based on region. And then this just shows the total units sold by the same categories. So let's just delete this and we'll re-add it. So let's just drag these a little bit bigger and go to, but we'll first just click on anything in the first pivot table, and we'll just click the Analyze button under Pivot Table menu and Insert Slicer. We'll insert it based on region since both these pivot tables depend on the region specified. Click OK. Once you have that box back up there, let's right click on it and click Report Connections as we did before. Now both of the pivot tables on our sheet are showing up because they've been created from the same master table. Once you click OK, this should now be linked to both of the pivot tables. So it's going to change them both at the same time. It keeps resizing this guy, but that's the idea. Now, if we want to add a chart that's linked to both of these, we can do so. So let's just go to our insert, and let's insert a nice chart that works. To select the data for your chart, right-click on the chart and click Select Data. Our first data series range will just be the, here we have our female, male, so we'll just add the first series, which will be female, and we have female for, perfect, so it got both, because I just selected this pivot table. So I actually got both the female and the male, and then the corresponding axis categories, and just click OK. Now it should also respond to changes in the slicer. We haven't added any data for the second table yet. To add data from the second table, again, just right-click on the chart and click on Select Data. We'll add a new series to the chart. So just click Cancel, OK. And again, right-click on the chart, Select Data, and it doesn't want to let me add anything else. Let's just try that again. And let's insert another chart. And select data. Just add one. That could just be this. And that's the series name will just be female. And series values will be these. Perfect, and we'll edit the category axis here. And then we'll add a second one, which will just be male, and it will contain these values. Okay, and okay. Now let's add data for the unit sold. So we could make, and let's add a legend as well, so it's easier for people to understand, because this is going to be a bit of a complicated one that we'll make. So if you want to add a legend, you can just go to the Design tab of the Chart Tools, and then Add Chart Element at the very left, bottom, Add a Legend at the bottom. Perfect. We can see that we have to rename one of the series, because it's displaying wrong. Right click on here, select data, change the name of this to just be this cell here, female. Perfect. So we now have female and male sales for each of these. If I select options in the slicer, it changes the chart correspondingly. And that's for all. Next, let's add, because the slicer links these two pivot tables, let's add data from this pivot table to the chart as well. So not only can you see total purchase differences between genders, but let's also add the number of units purchased. So let's right click on here and add a new series using the select data option. Here we'll add, well, let's change this name first so it says female and let's just use this. Maybe we can rename this here. No. So we'll give it a custom name in our table then. So we'll select data. I just want to change this name so it says female dollars, female spending. And this will be male spending. Perfect. And now let's add another one. This will be female. Let's make it actually female units purchased. Close it off with the close quotation mark. Select the series values. Okay. Perfect. Now let's add our male units purchased. And our series values are here. And okay. Now let's also, oh perfect, it already updated everything. And let's just drag this a little bit bigger so it's easier for us to see. Now that this chart's been created, you can hide these rows. And it ended up hiding our table. Bad idea. There we are. And they're still hidden. And where'd our slicer go? There it is. I'm not sure. I thought you could hide these rows. Give me 1 second. Just drag them really tiny. Perfect. So now our users have the option to toggle between regions, and it will automatically show the difference between male and female spending as well as male and female units purchased. So you can continue to add even more data to the chart, but it's really useful to know how to link the slicer between two different pivot tables so that you can add different series of data to the chart. So something kind of, if you want to take away from the graph, is that males spend more, and they also purchase more units for movies. Here, females spend more for music, but they don't really purchase that much more. Here we see that, this one's I guess a little bit more interesting. The females purchase more podcasts. Sorry, the females spend more on podcasts, but purchase less. Males spend less on podcasts, but they actually purchase more. So it's really useful for people to be able to read the data graphically as opposed to just scrolling through the pivot tables. And if you link them to a chart, it can save them even more time. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can be reached at support@excellogics.org. Thank you.